It is the mediatorial kingdom of Christ that is here intended, not that which as God he exercises over all the works of his hand. It is that kingdom which is an empire of grace and administration of mercy over our guilty world. It is the dispensation intended for the salvation of fallen sinners of our race by the gospel. And on this account the gospel is often called the kingdom of heaven, because its happy consequences are not confined to this earth, but appear in heaven in the highest perfection and last through all eternity. Hence, not only the church of Christ on earth and the dispensation of the gospel, but all the saints in heaven, and that more finished economy under which they are placed, are all included in the kingdom of Christ. Here his kingdom is in its infancy, but in heaven is arrived to perfection. But it is substantially the same. Though the immediate design of this kingdom is the salvation of believers, of the guilty race of man, and such are its subjects in a peculiar sense, yet it extends to all worlds, to heaven and earth and hell. The whole universe is put under a mediatorial head. But then, as the apostle observes, he is made head over all things to his church, Ephesians 1:22. That is, for the benefit and salvation of his church. As mediator, he is carrying on a glorious scheme for the recovery of man, and all parts of the universe are interested or concern themselves in this grand event. And therefore, they are all subjected to him, that he may so manage them as to promote this end and baffle and overwhelm all opposition. The elect angels rejoice in so benevolent a design for peopling their mansions, left vacant by the fall of so many of their fellow angels, with colonies transplanted from our world and from a race of creatures that they had given for lost. And therefore Christ, as a mediator, is made the head of all the heavenly armies, and he employs them as his ministering spirits to minister to them that are heirs of salvation, Hebrews 1:14. These glorious creatures are always on the wing, ready to discharge his orders in any part of his vast empire, and delight to be employed in the services of his mediatorial kingdom. This is also an event in which the fallen angels deeply interest themselves. They have united all their force and art for near 6,000 years to disturb and subvert his kingdom and blast the designs of redeeming love. They therefore are all subjected to the control of Christ, and he shortens and lengthens their chains as he pleases, and they cannot go a hair's breadth beyond his permission. The scriptures represent our world in its state of guilt and misery as the kingdom of Satan. Sinners, while slaves to sin, are his subjects, and every act of disobedience against God is an act of homage to this infernal prince. And Satan is called the god of this world, 2 Corinthians 4:4. The prince of this world, John 12:31. The power of darkness, Luke 22:53. The prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, Ephesians 2:3. And sinners are said to be taken captive by him at his will, 2 Timothy 2:26. Hence also the ministers of Christ, who are employed to recover sinners to a state of holiness and happiness, are represented as soldiers armed for war, not indeed with carnal weapons, but with those which are spiritual, plain truth arguments and miracles. And these are made mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth himself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, 2 Corinthians 10:3, 4, and 5. And Christians in general are represented as wrestling not with flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, Ephesians 6:12. Hence also in particular it is that the death of Christ is represented not as a defeat, but as an illustrious conquest gained over the powers of hell. Because by this means a way was opened for the deliverance of sinners from under their power, and restoring them unto liberty and the favor of God, by that strange, contemptible weapon, the cross. And by the glorious resurrection of Jesus, he spoiled principalities and powers and made a show of them openly, triumphing over them, Colossians 2:15. Through death, says the apostle, he destroyed him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, Hebrews 2:14. Had not Christ by his death offered a propitiatory sacrifice for the sins of men, they would have continued forever under the tyranny of Satan. but he has purchased liberty, life, and salvation for them. And thus he hath destroyed the kingdom of darkness and translated multitudes from it into his own gracious and glorious kingdom. Hence, upon the right of redemption, his mediatorial authority extends to the infernal regions, and he controls and restrains those malignant, mighty, and turbulent potentates according to his pleasure. Farther, the inanimate world is connected with our Lord's design to save sinners, and is therefore subjected to him as mediator. He causes the sun to rise, the rain to fall, and the earth to yield her increase, to furnish provision for the subjects of his grace, and to raise, support, and accommodate heirs for his heavenly kingdom. As for the sons of men who are more immediately concerned in this kingdom, and for whose sake it was erected, they are all its subjects. But then they are of different sorts according to their characters. Multitudes are rebels against his government. That is, they do not voluntarily submit to his authority, nor choose they to do his service. They will not obey his laws. But they are his subjects notwithstanding. That is, he rules and manages them as he pleases, whether they will or not. This power is necessary to carry on successfully his gracious design towards his people, for unless he had the management of his enemies, they might baffle his undertakings and successfully counteract the purposes of his love. The kings of the earth, as well as vulgar rebels of a private character, have often set themselves against his kingdom, and sometimes they flatter themselves they had entirely demolished it. But Jesus reigns absolute and supreme over the kings of the earth, and overrules and controls them as he thinks proper, and he disposes all the revolutions, the rises and falls of kingdoms and empires, so as to be subservient to the great designs of his mediation, and their united policies and powers cannot frustrate the work which he has undertaken. But besides these rebellious, involuntary subjects, he has, blessed be his name, gained the consent of thousands, and they have become his willing subjects by their own choice. They regard his authority, they love his government, they make it their study to please him and to do his will. Over these, he exercises a government of special grace here, and he will make them the happy subjects of the kingdom of his glory hereafter. And it is his government over these that I intend more particularly to consider. Once more, the kingdom of Jesus is not confined to this world, but all the millions of mankind in the invisible world are under his dominion, and will continue so to everlasting ages. He is the Lord of the dead and of the living, Romans 14:9, and has the keys of Hades and the vast invisible world, including heaven as well as hell, and of death, Revelation 1:18. It is he that turns the key and opens the door of death for mortals to pass from world to world. It is he that opens the gates of heaven and welcomes and admits the nations that keep the commandments of God. And it is he that opens the prison of hell and locks it fast upon the prisoners of divine justice. He will forever exercise authority over the vast regions of the unseen world with the unnumbered multitudes of spirits with which they are peopled. You hence see, my brethren, the universal extent of the Redeemer's kingdom, and in this respect, how much does it differ from all the kingdoms of the earth? The kingdoms of Great Britain, France, China, Persia are but little spots of the globe. Our world has indeed been oppressed in former times with what mortals call universal monarchies. Such were the Babylonian, the Persian, the Grecian, and especially the Roman. But in truth, these were so far from being strictly universal that a considerable part of the habitable earth was not so much as known to them. But this is an empire strictly universal. It extends over land and sea. It reaches beyond the planetary worlds and all the luminaries of heaven, and they beyond the throne of the most exalted archangels and downward to the lowest abyss of hell. A universal empire in the hands of a mortal is a huge, unwieldy thing, a heap of confusion, a burthen to mankind. And it has always rushed headlong from its glory and fallen to pieces by its own weight. But Jesus is equal to the immense province of an empire strictly universal. His hand is able to hold the reins, and it is the blessing of our world to be under his administration. He will turn what appears to us scenes of confusion into perfect order, and convince all worlds that he has not taken one wrong step in the whole plan of his infinite government.